The crystalline chamber of the Intergalactic Council hummed with tension, thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Ambassador Zethkri of the Vorthon Empire adjusted his breathing apparatus, trying to calm his three hearts as he watched the holographic display above the circular table. The numbers were devastating. Sector 7742 Lhasa, 93%, announced Council Speaker Yilnara, her translucent skin flickering between pale blue and deep purple, a sure sign of distress. Sector 7743, total annihilation. Sector 7744, no survivors. Around the vast table, representatives from 47 different species sat in stunned silence. Some had tentacles that writhed nervously. Others had metallic carapaces that clicked and whirred. A few existed as pure energy, their forms shifting like captured lightning in containment fields, but all shared the same expression of absolute horror. "How?" whispered Ambassador Cordal, his massive bulk causing the chair to groan. "How did one single primitive species, destroy 3 of our most advanced fleets?" The hologram shifted, showing surveillance footage from the recent battles. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Massive dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, cracked in half like broken toys. And through it all, smaller human vessels darted between the wreckage like angry insects, never stopping, never retreating. "They don't surrender," said Speaker Yilnara, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've studied their communications, their battle patterns, their cultural database. These humans, they literally don't know how to give up." Ambassador Zethkri leaned forward, his 6 eyes focusing intently on the display. "That's impossible. Every species has survival instincts. Every intelligent race understands when they're outmatched." "Not these creatures," replied Dr. Vexandra, the Council's chief xenobiologist. Her insectoid form clicked as she manipulated the holographic controls. "Look at this." The display changed to show human historical records, thousands of years, of warfare, rebellion, and conflict. Images of humans fighting hopeless battles, charging impossible odds, dying rather than surrendering, flashed across the chamber. "They have a saying," Dr. Vexandra continued, her translator crackling slightly, "death before dishonor." Another one, "Give me liberty or give me death." And perhaps most disturbing, "We will fight them on the beaches. We will fight them in the fields. We will never surrender." A low murmur rippled through the council chamber. Several ambassadors exchanged worried glances. "But surely," interrupted Ambassador Talan of the hegemony, "when faced with complete extinction, they would see reason?" Dr. Vexandra's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. 3 days ago we contacted their leaders with our standard surrender terms. Generous terms, I might add. Relocation to a pleasant agricultural world, preservation of their culture, protection under council law. "And their response?" asked Speaker Yilnara, though from her expression, she already dreaded the answer. "Single-word transmission," Dr. Vexandra replied. One word that their translators render as "no." The chamber erupted in shocked chatter. Species that had evolved from prey animals huddled together. Predator races bared their fangs in confusion. The energy beings flickered faster, their forms becoming unstable. Then followed by another transmission 20 minutes later. Dr. Vexandra continued. 3 words this time: come and take. Ambassador Zethkri felt his stomach drop. In all his centuries of diplomatic service, he had never encountered anything like this. Every species, when properly motivated, could be reasoned with. Every race had some concept of surrender, of accepting defeat to preserve what they could. What about their leadership? He asked desperately. Surely their government can be negotiated with? Dr. Vexandra pulled up more data. Their leadership structure is kind of unusual. Multiple competing governments across their world, but when threatened externally, they unify instantly. And their leaders, they're elected by the population, which means they think exactly like the rest of their species. Show them the admiral, suggested someone from across the chamber. The hologram shifted to show a middle-aged human female in a military uniform, covered with strange markings and symbols. She stood on what appeared to be the bridge of a warship, fire and sparks raining down around her as explosions rocked the vessel. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force," Dr. Vexandra explained. "This recording was made during the Battle of Proxima Station. Her flagship was surrounded, outgunned 50-1 with hull breaches on 17 decks and her engine core about to explode. They watched as the human admiral wiped blood from her forehead and spoke into her communication device. The translator converted her words. All ships, this is Chen. We're not going home today, people. But neither are they. Make every shot count. Earth expects that every man and woman will do their duty. Chen out." She then rammed her exploding ship into our command dreadnought. Dr. Vexandra added quietly. Both vessels were completely destroyed. Her final transmission was, "Tell Earth we held the line." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the nervous clicking of various appendages. Speaker Yilnara stood slowly, her crystalline form catching the light in prism patterns. "The question before us today is simple. Do we continue this war knowing it may cost us everything? Or do we find another solution?" "What other solution could there be?" demanded General Krathox of the War Council, his armored bulk creating small tremors in the floor. "They refuse to surrender. They refuse to negotiate. They fight like the very demons of the void." "Then perhaps," said a new voice from the shadows, at the edge of the chamber, "we need to understand why they fight at all." All eyes turned toward the speaker, an ancient figure wrapped in flowing robes that seemed to absorb light. This was Elder Mordoon of the Seekers, the Council's most mysterious and oldest members. "Explain," ordered Speaker Yilnara. Elder Mordoon glided forward, moving without seeming to touch the ground. "In all our centuries of expansion, we have conquered thousands of worlds, absorbed hundreds of species into our council, but we have always followed the same pattern. Demonstrate our superior force, offer reasonable terms, accept their surrender." "As it should be," rumbled General Krathox. "Civilization requires order." "But what if," Elder Mordoon continued, "what if we encountered a species that views surrender itself as a violation of their deepest nature? What if for humans the choice is not between surrender and death, but between freedom and extinction?" Dr. Vexandra's databanks whirred as she processed this. "The cultural analysis supports this theory. Humans appear to have evolved under constant threat. Predators, environmental disasters, resource scarcity. Their survival strategy wasn't adaptation or migration like most species. It was stubborn, relentless resistance. They literally evolved to never give up," she added, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. Ambassador Zethkri found himself staring at the frozen image of Admiral Chen, still displayed in the center of the chamber. There was something in her expression, not hatred or rage, but a calm determination that sent chills through his exoskeleton. "So what do you propose, Elder Mordoon?" asked Speaker Yilnara. The ancient being turned toward the assembly, and though his face was hidden in shadows, his voice carried across the chamber with crystal clarity. "We stop trying to conquer them," he said simply, "and we start trying to understand them." General Krathox's roar of outrage echoed through the chamber. "Understand them? They've destroyed 3 of our fleets. They've killed millions of our soldiers. You would have us simply, what? Give up?" Elder Mordoon's response was quiet but cut through the general's bluster like a blade through fabric. "I would have us survive, General, because if we continue this war, if we keep trying to force these humans to surrender, I fear we may discover what happens when a species that doesn't know how to quit decides to take the fight to us." The hologram flickered and changed, showing the current position of human fleets. Instead of retreating toward Earth after their victories, they were spreading outward, moving toward Council space. "They're not defending anymore," Dr. Vexandra whispered, her compound eyes wide with realization. "They're hunting us." The chamber erupted in panic. Some ambassadors began demanding immediate evacuation of border worlds. Others called for the deployment of planet-killer weapons. A few simply sat in stunned silence, their minds unable to process the implications. But Speaker Yilnara raised her hand for silence, and gradually the chaos subsided. "Elder Mordoon," she said formally, "the Council places you in charge of first contact protocols. Find a way to communicate with these humans, find out what they want. And if they want war?" asked General Krathox, his voice heavy with doom. Elder Mordoon was already moving toward the exit, his robes flowing behind him like liquid shadow. He paused at the threshold and spoke without turning around. "Then we had better hope they're willing to teach us how to fight like they do," he said, "because something tells me we're going to need to learn." As the chamber doors sealed behind him, the assembled representatives of 47 species sat in the growing darkness, each contemplating the same terrifying thought. What do you do when you encounter a force that simply refuses to be stopped? The answer, they were beginning to realize, might determine the survival of everything they had built. Outside the council chambers, in the vast emptiness of space, human ships continued their steady advance toward the heart of the galaxy, their crews unaware that they had just become the subject of the most important decision in galactic history. The war was about to change. The only question was whether the galaxy was ready for what came next. 3 days after the emergency council session, Elder Mordoon stood in the observation deck of the neutral research vessel Harmony's Edge, watching the most unusual diplomatic meeting in galactic history unfold before him. The human ship Indomitable hung in space like a steel predator, its angular hull scarred with battle damage that the crew hadn't bothered to repair. It was smaller than most council vessels, but something about its design suggested pure, focused lethality. No decorative elements, no artistic flourishes, just armor, weapons, and engines. "They agreed to the meeting," reported Captain Yathara, the vessel's commander. Her tentacles writhed nervously as she monitored the communications array. "But they insisted on keeping their weapons powered." Elder Mordoon nodded, unsurprised. "What did they say when you explained standard diplomatic protocol?" "Their representative, Captain Martinez, said, and I quote, 'We'll talk, but we won't roll over and show our bellies. Your people want to negotiate, they can do it looking down our gun barrels.'" Despite the gravity of the situation, Elder Mordoon found himself almost amused. The more he learned about humans, the more he understood why the Council's traditional approach had failed so spectacularly. "Inform Captain Martinez that we accept their terms," he said, "and prepare the conference room. This should be educational." An hour later, Elder Mordoon sat across a reinforced table from 3 humans, who had transported over from their ship. The contrast was striking. Where most species sent their most diplomatic individuals to first contact meetings, humanity had apparently decided to send their warriors. Captain Elena Martinez sat in the center, a woman in her early 40s with graying hair and scars that spoke of a lifetime of conflict. Her uniform was practical military gear, not ceremonial dress. To her left sat Commander James Liu, whose cybernetic arm whirred softly as he took notes. To her right was Dr. Amara Okafor, who wore the insignia of their science division but carried herself like a soldier. "So," Captain Martinez said without preamble, "are we here to talk surrender terms?" "That depends," Elder Mordoon replied carefully. "Are you prepared to discuss them?" The 3 humans exchanged glances, and then Captain Martinez did something that had never happened in a council first contact meeting. She laughed. "Elder, with all due respect, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about how this works," she said. "We're not here to surrender. We're here to discuss the terms of your retreat from human space." The translator must have malfunctioned, Elder Mordoon thought. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Commander Liu leaned forward, his cybernetic fingers drumming against the table. "You attacked our colonies. You killed our people. You demanded we abandon our worlds and relocate to some farm planet where you could keep us like pets. Did you really think we were going to say yes, please?" Dr. Okafor consulted her tablet, her voice taking on the tone of someone reading from a scientific report. "Your council has conquered over 300 species in the last millennium. Your standard Pattern is overwhelming force demonstration, followed by generous surrender terms, followed by integration into your collective. It's actually quite efficient. But we're not interested in being efficient, Captain Martinez added. We're interested in remaining free. Elder Mordoon felt a growing sense of unease. The human approach to diplomacy was unlike anything in the Council's vast databases. They weren't angry or vengeful, they were simply determined. Captain Martinez, he said slowly, you understand that the Council represents the combined military might of 47 different species? Our resources dwarf those of a single world. Yeah, we figured that out when you sent those first 3 fleets, she replied calmly. Impressive hardware. Shame about the tactical doctrine. Commander Liu pulled up a holographic display showing the recent battles. Your ships are built for intimidation and overwhelming firepower. Perfect for forcing surrender. Terrible for fighting an enemy that won't quit. Dr. Okafor nodded in agreement. You fight like beings who expect their opponents to behave rationally, to cut their losses when the situation becomes untenable, to preserve what they can rather than lose everything. And that's not how humans operate? Elder Mordoon asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Captain Martinez smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Elder, let me tell you about the Battle of Thermopylae. About 300 Spartans who held off an army of hundreds of thousands, knowing they were all going to die. Let me tell you about the Alamo, where less than 200 defenders fought to the last man against overwhelming odds, or the Warsaw Ghetto, where ordinary people fought tanks with pistols and bottles because dying on their feet was better than living on their knees. The holographic display shifted, showing images from human history, scenes of desperate battles, last stands, and impossible odds overcome through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. These aren't anomalies in human culture, Dr. Okafor explained. They're aspirational examples. Every human child grows up learning these stories. They're part of who we are. Elder Mordoon studied the images, feeling something like dread settling in his consciousness. But surely your people understand the concept of acceptable losses, of strategic retreat, of pragmatic surrender? Commander Liu's cybernetic hand clenched into a fist. We understand the concepts. We just reject them when it comes to our freedom. Even if it means extinction? Elder Mordoon pressed. The 3 humans exchanged another look, and this time their expressions were deadly serious. Especially then, Captain Martinez said quietly, because extinction with honor is still extinction. But surrender, that's not death, that's erasure. That's becoming something we're not just to keep breathing. Dr. Okafor leaned back in her chair, her scientific mind clearly wrestling with how to explain something that was more emotional than logical. In your cultural database, you must have information about human pack bonding, correct? Our tendency to form intense emotional attachments not just to individuals, but to concepts? Elder Mordoon nodded slowly. Freedom isn't just a political concept for humans, she continued. It's something we bond with. Betray that bond, force us to abandon it, and you haven't conquered us. You've just created a species-wide psychological break that will echo through every generation. Which brings us to why we're really here, Captain Martinez said, her voice taking on a harder edge. Your council made 2 mistakes when it decided to conquer humanity. First, you assumed we were rational actors who would weigh costs and benefits, like a business transaction. And the second mistake? Elder Mordoon asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Commander Liu's smile was sharp as a blade. You assumed we were playing defense. The holographic display changed again, showing current fleet movements. Human ships weren't just defending Earth's colonies anymore. They were advancing on multiple fronts, probing council space, hitting supply lines and communication relays. We've been analyzing your military structure, Dr. Okafor said conversationally. It's built around the assumption that conquered species will integrate peacefully into your collective. Your logistics, your communications, your entire strategic doctrine assumes that once you defeat a species, they become allies. But we're not going to integrate, Captain Martinez added. We're not going to become peaceful. We're going to keep fighting until one of us doesn't exist anymore. Elder Mordoon felt his ancient hearts beating faster. You're talking about a war of extinction. We're talking about the only kind of war we know how to fight, Commander Liu corrected. Total war, unconditional war. War where surrender isn't an option because surrender isn't survival, it's just slow-motion death. The implications hit Elder Mordoon like a physical blow. The Council's entire civilization was built on the principle of integration, conquest, followed by assimilation, enemies transformed into allies. But what happened when you encountered a species that couldn't be transformed, that would rather die than change? Your people, he said slowly. You're planning to fight us with everything. You have, no matter the cost. Not just us, Dr. Okafor said quietly. We've been monitoring your communications. We know about the species you've conquered, the cultures you've absorbed. Some of them are starting to wonder. If humans can say no to the Council, why can't they? The words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples of implication through Elder Mordoon's consciousness. The Council's greatest strength, the vast collective of species they had integrated, could become their greatest weakness if those species began to dream of freedom again. You're trying to start a rebellion, he breathed. Captain Martinez shook her head. We're not trying to start anything, we're just being ourselves, and apparently being human is contagious. She stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Here are our terms, Elder. The Council withdraws from all human space immediately. You leave our colonies alone. You stop trying to conquer us. Return. We'll limit our retaliation to military targets. And if we refuse? Elder Mordoon asked, though he dreaded the answer. Commander Liu smiled that razor-sharp smile again. Then you get to find out what happens when a species with nothing to lose decides to take everyone else with them. Dr. Okafor closed her tablet and stood as well. We've run the projections, Elder. A total war between humanity and the Council will devastate both sides. But we'll recover from devastation. We've done it before. The question is, will you? As the three humans prepared to return to their ship, Captain Martinez paused at the doorway. One more thing, Elder. That saying of ours, death before dishonor, it doesn't just apply to us. It applies to everything we care about. Our friends, our families, our worlds, our ideas. We don't just refuse to surrender ourselves. We refuse to let anything we value surrender either. What are you saying? Elder Mordoon asked. Her smile was sad but determined. I'm saying that every species you've conquered, every culture you've absorbed, every world you've integrated into your collective, they're all under human protection now, and we don't know how to give up on things we're protecting. As the airlock sealed and the human ship began to move away, Elder Mordoon sat alone in the conference room, contemplating the magnitude of the situation. The Council hadn't just encountered a species that refused to surrender. They had encountered a species that was fundamentally incompatible with the concept of conquest itself. And now that species was coming for them, carrying with it a message that would spread through every corner of the galaxy. Freedom was worth fighting for, no matter the odds. The war was about to become something unprecedented in galactic history, not a conquest or a rebellion, but a fundamental challenge to the very concept of empire itself. And somehow Elder Mordoon realized the Council had to find a way to survive it. The emergency session of the Intergalactic Council convened in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species filled the chamber, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the universal translators struggled to process. Fear hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Elder Mordoon materialized at the center of the assembly, his ancient form commanding immediate attention despite the panic surrounding him. The chamber gradually quieted, though the tension remained thick. Enough to cut. Report, ordered Speaker Yilnara, her crystalline form flickering with stress patterns. The humans rejected our terms, Elder Mordoon began. Furthermore, they presented their own conditions for cessation of hostilities. General Krathox slammed his massive fist on the table, causing several smaller ambassadors to jump. What conditions? What could these primitives possibly demand? Complete withdrawal from human space, Elder Mordoon replied calmly. Recognition of human sovereignty over all their worlds and colonies, and cessation of all conquest activities in what they term their sphere of influence, which appears to include approximately 40% of this spiral arm. The chamber erupted in outraged shouts and protests. Ambassador Zeth Kree had to activate his emergency breathing apparatus to prevent hyperventilation. Impossible, shrieked Ambassador Talan. The audacity, the sheer unbridled arrogance. It gets worse. Elder Mordoon continued, his voice cutting through the noise. They've begun broadcasting to every species within Council space. The message is simple. Any world that wishes to withdraw from the collective will receive human protection. This announcement caused several ambassadors to actually faint. Others began emergency communications with their home worlds. The energy beings flickered so rapidly they looked like strobing lights. Dr. Vexandra's mandibles clicked frantically as she accessed her data networks. 17 worlds have already ceased tribute payments, she reported, her voice tight with disbelief. 3 have expelled council administrators. The Cathari cluster has declared complete independence. Speaker Yilnara's form shifted from pale blue to deep crimson, a color none of the assembled ambassadors had ever seen her display before. This is insurrection on a galactic scale. No, said a new voice from the shadows. This is revolution. All eyes turned toward the speaker, a figure in diplomatic robes who moved with the distinctive glide of the Vorthon Intelligence Service. This was Agent Sektar, one of the Council's most effective information gatherers. Explain, ordered Speaker Yilnara. Agent Sektar activated his personal hologram projector, filling the air above the table with intercepts from across the galaxy. The human broadcasts aren't just offering protection, they're offering hope. Listen. A human voice filled the chamber, translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. To all sapient beings living under the rule of the Intergalactic Council, you have the right to determine your own destiny. You have the right to govern yourselves. You have the right to say no to those who would rule you without your consent. These rights are not granted by governments or councils. They exist because you exist. And if you choose to claim them, Earth stands with you. The message was followed by technical data. Shipping routes the humans had cleared of council patrols, safe corridors for refugee transports, and detailed intelligence about council military positions. But it was the next part of the transmission that caused the real panic in the chamber. To the warriors and leaders of the Intergalactic Council, you have built an empire on the assumption that all thinking beings will eventually choose survival over freedom. Today, you learn that assumption is false. Every species you have conquered, every world you have absorbed, every culture you have integrated into your collective, they all had the same right to choose that you claim for yourselves. Today they remember that right exists. General Krathox stood up so violently that his chair cracked. This is war propaganda, seditious manipulation. Perhaps, Agent Sektar replied coolly. But it's working. We're receiving reports of uprisings on 14 worlds. The hegemony has lost contact with 3 entire star systems. And the humans... He paused, his expression grim even by Vorthon standards. The humans have begun moving their fleets into position around council administrative centers, not attacking, just watching, waiting. Elder Mordoon felt a cold certainty settling in his consciousness. They're not trying to conquer us. They're trying to liberate us. Liberate us from what? Demanded Ambassador Talan. From ourselves, Elder Mordoon replied. From the assumption that empire is the natural order of things. From the belief that some beings have the right to rule others simply because they can. Dr. Vexandra's data analysis completed, and her results sent another wave of terror through the assembly. The pattern is clear. Every species that has declared independence is moving toward alliance with Earth. They're not just leaving the Council, they're joining something else, something new. What kind of alliance? Asked Speaker Yilnara, though she seemed to dread the answer. Based on intercepted communications, Dr. Vexandra replied, they're calling it the Voluntary Federation. The basic principle appears to be that no member species can be compelled to do anything without their explicit consent. No tribute, no military service, no cultural integration, just cooperation among equals. The concept was so alien to the assembled representatives that many struggled to process it. Empire, hierarchy, the rule of the strong over the weak. These were the natural laws of galactic civilization. But the humans seemed to be suggesting something else entirely. "It's impossible," whispered Ambassador Zethkri. "Civilization requires structure, organization. Someone has to be in charge." "Do they?" Elder Mordoon asked quietly. "Or have we simply convinced ourselves that's true because it justifies our position at the top?" Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring. Throughout the chamber, emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red as urgent communications flooded in from across council space. Agent Sektar's expression grew darker as he processed the incoming data. "The situation is escalating. The humans have just broadcast new intelligence, detailed records of council integration procedures, including the memory modification protocols we use on conquered populations." A collective gasp rose from the assembly. The memory modification programs were the council's most closely guarded secret, the method by which they ensured conquered species gradually forgot their independent cultures and became loyal council. "Citizens, how did they acquire that information?" demanded General Krathox. "Unknown," Agent Sektar replied, "but the psychological impact is devastating. Across the galaxy, conquered species are beginning to remember things they had forgotten. Cultural practices that were voluntarily abandoned, leaders who chose to step down, resistance movements that were peacefully dissolved." Dr. Vexiandra's analysis programs chimed with new data. Mass psychological break detected across 43 council worlds. The suppressed memories are resurging. Populations that have been model citizens for centuries are suddenly remembering what they lost. The implication struck the assembly like a physical blow. The council's entire civilization was built on the assumption that conquered species would gradually become willing participants in the collective. But if those species remembered what had been taken from them, how many worlds are in active rebellion? Speaker Yilnara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. As of this moment, Agent Sektar checked his latest updates. 237 and growing. The number was staggering. In the span of a few days, humanity had managed to destabilize an empire that had taken millennia to build. "What do the humans want from us?" asked Elder Mordoon, voicing the question that everyone was thinking but no one wanted to ask. Agent Sektar activated a new communication intercept. Captain Martinez's voice filled the chamber, but this time her tone was formal, almost judicial. "To the leadership of the Intergalactic Council, you have a choice to make. You can continue to fight for the right to rule others against their will, knowing that such a fight will destroy everything you have built. Or you can join us in creating something better, a galaxy where cooperation is voluntary, where diversity is celebrated, where no being rules another without consent." The message paused, and when it continued, there was something almost sad in the human captain's voice. "We know this is hard. We know it means giving up everything you thought you knew about how civilization works. But we also know it's possible, because we've seen what happens when free beings choose to work together instead of being forced to submit. The choice is yours, but choose quickly, because every day you delay, more of your citizens remember what freedom feels like. And once they remember, they're not going back." As the transmission ended, the chamber fell into stunned silence. The assembled representatives of the galaxy's most powerful empire sat motionless, each contemplating the same impossible choice: evolve or face extinction. Elder Mordoon looked around the chamber at the faces and face analogs of beings who had spent their entire lives believing in the necessity of hierarchy, of empire, of the strong ruling the weak. Now they were being asked to abandon everything they thought they knew about how the universe worked. "Speaker Yilnara," he said formally, "I request permission to return to human space." The crystalline being turned toward him, her form now cycling rapidly through colors that had no names in any language. "For what purpose?" "To learn," Elder Mordoon replied simply. To understand how they've managed to create cooperation without conquest. To discover if what they're offering is real. General Krathox snarled his disapproval. You would betray everything we've built? I would save what can be saved, Elder Mordoon replied calmly. Because if we continue on our current path, we'll lose everything anyway. At least this way we might learn something worth preserving. As debates and arguments erupted around him, Elder Mordoon found himself staring at the frozen image of Captain Martinez that still hung in the chamber's center. There was something in her expression, not triumph or vindication, but a kind of patient determination that suggested she would wait as long as necessary for them to make the right choice. The question was, did the Council have the courage to make it? Outside the chamber across the galaxy, billions of beings who had lived their entire lives under Council rule were beginning to remember what freedom tasted like. And with each passing moment, the old order grew weaker, while something new and unprecedented began to take its place. The Age of Empire was ending. What came next would depend on whether the galaxy's oldest powers could learn to let go of control and trust in something they had never tried before. The willing cooperation of free beings. The revolution had begun, and it was led by a species that had never learned how to surrender. 6 months after first contact, Elder Mordoon stood on the observation deck of the human vessel Determination, watching something unprecedented in galactic history unfold before him. Through the reinforced transparisteel, he could see dozens of ships from various species approaching the neutral meeting point, not as conquerors or conquered, but as equals coming together by choice. The sight still filled him with a mixture of wonder and vertigo. Impressive, isn't it? Captain Martinez joined him at the viewport, 2 cups of the bitter beverage humans called coffee in her hands. She offered one to Elder Mordoon, who had grown surprisingly fond of the stimulant during his stay aboard human vessels. I'm still trying to understand how it works, he admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. 6 months ago, half these species were trying to kill each other. Now they're working together to build, what did you call it? A constitutional convention, Captain Martinez replied, taking a sip of her coffee. Representatives from 43 different species trying to figure out how to create a government that can't become an empire. Elder Mordoon watched as a massive hegemony dreadnought took position near a cluster of smaller Cathari vessels. Just a year ago, the hegemony had been trying to crush the Cathari rebellion. Now their representatives were sharing technical data and cultural exchange programs. The Council still doesn't believe it's possible, he said. They think this alliance will collapse the moment you face a real crisis. Captain Martinez nodded. They're probably right. We probably will collapse when we face our first major crisis. The question is, will we learn from the collapse and build something better, or will we give up and go back to the old way of doing things? And which do you think will happen? The human woman was quiet for a moment, watching the peaceful fleet movements outside. Honestly, I think we'll make every mistake it's possible to make. We'll argue, we'll fight among ourselves, we'll probably come close to tearing everything apart a dozen times. But we won't give up on the idea that free beings can choose to work together. She turned toward him, and Elder Mordoon saw that same patient determination that had marked every interaction he'd had with humans. Because the alternative is what we're fighting to escape. A galaxy where someone else always gets to make the choices for everyone else. A communication alert chimed through the ship's speakers, interrupting their conversation. Commander Liu's voice followed. Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from the